So welcome to New York Buddha Dharma. We'd like to begin with a bow. And we're continuing working through the book called Profound Treasury of the Ocean of Dharma. We're in the first of 3 volumes, chapter 54. There are a lot of chapters. This is a digest of about 13 years of talks that my teacher and the teacher of some of the people in this room, Chogyam Trungpa, gave to his students. Every year he would take a group of students, anywhere from 100 to 250 or so, depending on the year. And they would go off for 3 months and practice meditation, and there would be lectures by him and by some of his senior students. And his lectures were digested into these 3 volumes, 13 years worth. And each volume, in the Tibetan tradition, Buddhism is divided into 3 stages, you might say, or 3 what are called yanas in Sanskrit. Yana, it means vehicle. And it is the first one, the second, and the third. The Hinayana, the Mahayana, Maha means greater vehicle, and the Vajrayana, which is the adamantine and indestructible vehicle. We're on volume 1, which covers the Hinayana, the foundational vehicle. And we're reading about, we're on chapter 54, which is called The Development of Set Patterns. And Rinpoche is talking about the kind of mistakes that we make, the errors, which lead us into confusion and suffering. And this chapter is a little odd in that it's not really sequential. It's kind of a potpourri of mistakes. And we'll just start in on the chapter and see what happens. And we can have a discussion as we go along. He says, generally, if you are not mindful and aware, that's what we've just been practicing, suffering begins to arise. Whereas if you are mindful and aware, suffering does not arise. You see, what he's talking about is the difference now between pain and suffering. Pain is something that comes along with life. You get stabbed in the leg, it hurts. You have an automobile accident and break a bone, it hurts. All these things. Pain is a natural part of living, one kind of pain or another, pain of loss, pain of aging. Suffering, though, has to do with wanting things to be otherwise. And it takes place in thought. Thought is always about the past and the future, always. And it's always driven by anxiety. The anxiety about me and my welfare. So when you come present, is what he's talking about here, when you are mindful and aware, that means when you come back into the present moment, thought dissolves. You're just right here, like right. And you're not necessarily thinking. Then you go back and you think, and then you come back and you're mindful and aware, and the thought is gone, it's clear. And without that thought, there is no suffering. So we alternate. Thought keeps arising, and as it arises again and again, it contains that kind of suffering in it, the desire for things to be different or the same as they were in the past. You either want to avoid what happened because it was unpleasant or recapitulate it, or the desire in the future for things to be better or to avoid a bad situation. So those thoughts are constantly driven by hope and fear, and they're full of anxiety. Rinpoche used to call that anxiety neurotic speed, because we get very speedy, we get into action trying to alleviate that pain. And it's kind of like a forward lean, we're running and like you're on a treadmill and your feet are moving underneath you and you can't stop because you're afraid you'll fall. So we get up in the morning and we can feel that whole thing cranking up, of what am I going to do today? And I got this problem and I need to solve it. And the whole thing goes like this, and you get into action. That's why meditation is so hard. The hardest part of meditation practice, having a daily practice, which is so important, is just getting your butt down on the meditation seat. Because when you do that, you're taking a time out on that neurotic speed. You're saying, no, I'm going to just be here. And that's the hardest part, just stopping and taking this time out and doing something that is not involved in alleviating those anxieties that reside in thought. And in this chapter, he's talking about what he calls 7 ego-oriented patterns that lead to suffering. And we'll just look at them. They're just one way, or in 7 ways, of coming at this. It's funny, but we'll get into it. He says the first one is regarding the 5 skandhas as belonging to oneself. Now, what that refers to is that in Buddhism, there is a description of all the different parts or pieces that go to make up what we call me, I. We think that I is one thing, but it's not. I, in fact, is just a word that resides in thought, and it refers to and is a sort of the culmination of a whole process. At the beginning level of the teachings, what the 5 skandhas refer to are the different parts of I. And it's the analogy is like you have a cart, and the cart has wheels and an axle and a bed and a steering mechanism, and yet we call it with one word, cart, even though it's made up of all these parts. I mean, if you take it apart, do you still have a cart? No. You've got a collection of wheels, axles, boards that make up the bed of the cart, and then you put it together and suddenly it's a cart. This is the analogy for I at the most primitive level of the path. At a more advanced level, it becomes a more dynamic description of how I is formed. And what they say is, this it came with a later school of Buddhism, but it's the one that Rinpoche favored, this particular description of I. What they say is that we're sitting here in the middle of space, as we do in meditation. And suddenly there is a concretization of this space is just open space, full of flashing colors and all different kinds of the 6 nobles arising. And then suddenly one of them emerges as the focus of attention. And suddenly you've got a figure and a ground. So suddenly I'm looking at Cliff. And everybody else in the background, everything fades into relative unimportance. And Cliff now is the figure, and everything else becomes the background. This is sort of a magical happening that takes place all the time in our consciousness. Now, when that happens, immediately that figure that has emerged from the ground implies something. It implies a perceiver of the figure here. So there's kind of a journey from that to this. If Lane is there, therefore I'm here. This is they used to do back in the 60s. Remember those experiments where they put people in sensory deprivation tanks? And the idea was that if you remove, if it were even possible, all of the external stimuli, then a person begins to lose track of who they are, because they don't have any external reference point to bounce off of. So that motion of that and then this is the beginning of ego. That is the birth, is the first skandha, they call it. When that appears out of this open space and becomes a figure, and it's more important, that is the birth of form, that's called. The second skandha appears when that implies this, and if I'm here, then I want to know, what is my relationship to Lane? Is it congenial? Is it antipathetic? Is it dangerous? Or is it neutral? Those are the 3 possibilities. There's not a fourth. Because the idea is, you see, that when you have a polar relationship, those things can only do one of three things. They can move further apart. That's what you do when you have hatred, fear. They can come closer together. That's what you do when you have love, passion, lust. And they can stay the same distance, and that's indifference. These are called the three poisons in Buddhism. And they are the three sort of mechanisms, or most fundamental mechanisms, by which I and other relate. We either push it away, pull it to us, or we remain indifferent. So the second skandha is what's called feeling, Vedana in Sanskrit. And what it means is that now that I know that that's out there, I'm here, that's the first skandha, birth of form. I want to reach out and feel the quality of that other. Is it for me, against me, or indifferent? So that's feeling. I reach out and I feel. The third skandha goes by different names. It's called samjna in Sanskrit. And Rinpoche, what he said about it is that having felt what that other is, whether it's for you, against you, or indifferent, then you want to do something about it. And the third skandha is impulse. You want to push it, or you want to pull it, or you're going to just ignore it. And that's the energy that this I brings to the relationship. Now, the trick is that all of this is just happening momentarily in time. None of this actually exists. These are all statements, just like these words. And the I that we assume is here is just an implication. It's a piece of inductive reasoning. If that's there, therefore I must be here. But if you go to look for this and find it, then it becomes another object out there with another perceiver further in. And that perceiver, you can never see it because there's always another one in there looking. It's just an implication or an induction. So it's all based on this fundamental error that we think that these things are real, that they actually exist, and then we're going to develop a whole strategy. So having felt the quality of other, having pushed or pulled or remained indifferent, we've got this energy now between this imputed I, which doesn't actually exist, it's just an imputation, and that sort of semi-temporarily created other. It's temporary because it's only while I'm paying attention to it that it's there in my experience. And then we begin to develop ways of labeling this because you want to become more efficient. So for instance, I remember the example I always use was my daughter, my first daughter, when she was a baby or a toddler and just beginning to develop language. She touched the stove and burned herself. The stove was hot. And we taught her the stove is hot. And after that, she would, when she was walking around in the kitchen, she would look at the stove and she would look at one of us and she'd point to it and she'd say, hot? You know, hot? This is the way we learn language. We learn it to protect ourselves and to maximize our relationships with these others. And that's the fourth skandha. Well, no, that's actually part of the third, impulse and concept. That third one. And then what happens is that as language develops, we become more and more sophisticated, and we begin to tell whole stories about I and other. And these stories get quite complicated, and they're based on past experience, what we've learned. You don't touch the stove because it's hot, you know, or you can touch the stove sometimes because it can be cool too. And you learn all these words and stories and their strategies for keeping me in a good place, me happy, healthy, avoiding pain and suffering. That's the fourth skandha. It's called samskara. And samskara means collections of these conceptual systems that we build to describe our world, this world of I and other, these different worlds. And it's also where karma resides. You see, karma is, what karma really means is that we are trapped in these stories that we are telling ourselves. And we are sort of what's the word, locked in to repeating them again and again and again. They're very repetitive, and they control the way in which we see the world, what we see, what we regard as important, and how we react to it. And so all of these stories that build up in the fourth skandha are the patterns of karma. And then what begins to happen is that the stories and the energy of the third skandha, that push-pull, wanting to push away what you don't like, wanting to consume, pull towards you what you do, they start to mix. The story and the energy mix. So we get what are called the full-blown emotions. They're called kleshas in Sanskrit. They're defilements. And they're things like passion, aggression, envy, jealousy, hatred, pride, arrogance. And what these are, hatred is that desire to push something away, and it always has a story attached. The story is, I hate that person because they insulted me. I hate that person because they rejected me, whatever it might be. And I love this person because they're so kind to me, and they love me, and they compliment me, and they give me pleasure, and on and on. We have all these stories. You're driving your car, and someone pulls out in front of you and scares the hell out of you, and you immediately start saying, that son of a bitch, they're blind, they're ignorant, they're stupid, and you put a story on it. But what's more likely is that the story comes first, and then the energy follows. Somebody says something to you that you don't like, and you say, how dare they? And suddenly there's this sense of indignation and anger and hurt that comes along with the story. So the stories and the energies are the full-blown emotions, and that's the fifth skandha. And in that's where we get the whole teaching about the six realms, which I'm not going to go into tonight, the different styles of emotional approaches to the world. And what happens is that, so let's all take one. And that is that, let's take jealous God realm. I like that one. That's one of the six realms. It's called the realm of the jealous gods. There are three ways that you can be in the jealous God realm. Three modalities. And people are. One is that you are actually born a jealous god. Well, if you were, you wouldn't be sitting here, because jealous gods who are born into that realm don't have physical bodies the way we do. You could be of the six realms, the only realms that have bodies that you and I most people would be able to see are the human realm and the animal realm. All the others, if you're born into the hell realm, you're not here on this planet. If you're born into the God realm, you're not here on this planet. And the jealous God realm isn't either. But if you're born a human being, here we all sit. We're all humans. We have human bodies. The second modality for understanding the realms is that we are born into the human realm here, but we could have the mentality of any of the other realms, including the human realm. So I always think, and that mentality tends to go on for a long time. It might be your whole life that you have that mentality. And the jealous God is interesting when the jealous gods are ones who, they see heaven. They see the possibility of heaven. And they're not there, but they want to be there. And they can see the gods who are in heaven, and they're envious. Envy is the dominant emotion of the jealous God realm. They're envious of those gods, and they want to storm the gates of heaven and become a god. But the gods are very protective. They lock the gates and they guard the walls, and it's very hard, So you have to be a real warrior if you're going to breach those walls and get into heaven. So jealous gods tend to be very smart, very aggressive, and warriors. And I think of the guys on Wall Street who are out there to make $1 billion. They haven't made their billion yet, but they want to, and they're storming the gates of heaven. They're trying to become billionaires. And I've had coaching clients who worked in the financial services industry. Maybe somebody here does, and it can be brutal. I mean, brutal, just nasty, criminal. A lot of criminality, a lot of immoral and criminal acts go on. And And it tends to be very male and very male chauvinistic and quite nasty. You know, Cliff knows. So that's jealous God realm, and then each realm has its own style, which we can go into another time. So this is what he means when he talks about regarding the five skandhas as belonging to oneself. What it means is that you think, that's me. But it's not. What it is just an imagining. It goes on, it has that birth, somebody's there, that's there, I'm here. And it's born over and over and over again in mental events, in thoughts. Every time you come completely present, aware of anything, the breath, your toe, the space, it cuts through the five skandhas. They dissolve, they're gone. They only live in the realm of mental events. And we will spend a lot of time in those realms of mental events. We walk down the street and our minds are constantly lost in dreams of one kind or another. Just watch yourself. And watch the kind of dreams you have. Dreams of depression, dreams of anger, dreams of ambition, dreams of love. All kinds. And you might begin to actually identify which realm you're in if you study them. Because we tend to stay in these realms for a long time. Now there's a third way in which we experience the realms. And that is that you could be a human being in the body of a human, which we all are in this room. You could have the mentality of a jealous God, envy, and your overall long-term strategy is to get to heaven in one way or another. It might be that you want to become a famous movie star. It might be that you want to become a guru. Might be you want to become a billionaire. Who knows what? And that's your long-term strategy. But then, moment to moment, we go through these realms. You could be a human being with the long-term mentality of a jealous God, and suddenly someone says they love you, and you melt, and suddenly you're experiencing, the desire of passion as a jealous God. Or it might be that suddenly somebody attacks you viciously and scares the hell out of you and makes you really, really frightened, and you're plunged into hell. Even though you're a jealous God, you're just full of anger and fear and hatred, and there's this heat, the heat of fear and anger. So there are these three levels of inhabiting the realms. What you're born into, your long-term psychology, of neurotic psychology, and then your short-term bursts of emotion. So that's you just got a quick course in the five skandhas.
And the six realms.
Huh?
And the six realms.
Well, we didn't go through all the realms. That's fun though. Yeah. The different styles of each realm. There's something. The human realm is fun. It's the realm of passion. It's the realm of appreciation of the phenomenal world. I really like that Mouton Cadet much better than that Chablis. I really like my steaks just medium rare, and if they overcook them, I'm going to send them back. It's just this fine distinctions of subtle appreciation in the human realm. Each realm has its own particular eccentricities. So the second one is protecting oneself from impermanence. We all know what that's about. We're trying to protect our health. And we have moments of happiness, and we want to hold on to them, but they never last. And then we are experiencing unhappiness, depression, suffering, and we want to escape it. And we really would like to be in heaven permanently. And we might even achieve heaven for a while. And sort of a definition of heaven is that you think you're there. I've arrived. They say of the gods who live in heaven that what constitutes that mentality is that everything they see is beautiful, everything they smell is perfume, everything they consume is ambrosia, everything they hear is music, and they make love with a glance. They don't have to engage in the messy process that human beings do. And you might, then you experience that and you want to hold on to it. You don't want the impermanence, but sooner or later it goes. And gods always fall. They always fall from heaven eventually. And they say that when a god is falling, they begin to smell bad. And the other gods notice it and avoid that person. And that really panics the god who's falling. There are all these stories you can read about it. So we want to protect ourselves from impermanence. We would like to live forever, be happy forever. This one is good, believing that one's view is best. Trungpa Rinpoche used to needle us for being what he called true believers. You can be a true believer Buddhist, and it's really antithetical to Buddhism. Buddhism just isn't about belief. It's really about waking up to one's immediate experience in the present moment. And it's sort of slightly nauseating, isn't it, when you encounter true believers? They put you off, the people who come to your door and want to, I used to encounter this in Boulder, the Seventh-day Adventists, who, there are only 81,000 places left in heaven, if you really get the true faith. Really, there was a number, 80, some odd, in the tens of thousands. It wasn't that much. And it never seemed to change, that number. Or the people who sell you, who are selling you pamphlets, trying to give you pamphlets on Jehovah's Witnesses or whatever they might be in the airports or the subway. Believing the extremes of nihilism and eternalism. Now this is a little trickier. This is really when you begin to become a philosopher and try to live your life according to an abstract philosophy. And by philosopher, that includes religions, because theism is a form of eternalism. Any kind of theistic religion. God is eternal, and so is the soul. And especially in Hinduism, where all this was born, right, all this had its origin. The idea of the soul, the Atman, is that it's this eternal thing, which ultimately is like a river heading to the ocean. And eventually it meets the ocean and dissolves and becomes one with the ocean. And the Atman eventually joins up with the ultimate Godhead, which is Brahman. This is classic to one version of Hinduism, anyhow, the main version. And Buddhism said there is no such thing as Brahman, and there is no such thing as the soul. They're just imaginary creations. And in fact, what we envision to be the soul is really the ego, this thing that doesn't exist. And nihilism was a philosophy in India, you see. This all comes out of Indian philosophy. There were nihilists, there were schools who said that there is no karma, there is no God, there are no rules, and basically you can do whatever you want as you can get away with it. And the only thing that I've ever seen in the West that might correspond to nihilism is existentialism. Although it doesn't necessarily say those things about doing anything you want. But if you read Sartre or Camus, they basically feel that life is meaningless. Camus, or Albert Camus, felt that life is utterly meaningless, and that all that, at best, a human being could do was to live a life as though it had meaning, and then you die. And it doesn't have any meaning. And all of these are just conceptual systems that come and go with just the way your thoughts come and go in meditation. And then the last three of these 7 ego-oriented patterns are passion, aggression, and ignorance, which I've just said something about in terms of the 5 skandhas. These are the 3 poisons. If you look at the wheel of life, probably a lot of you have seen the wheel of life, right? It has it's a wheel, it's got 6 realms. In the very center, not quite the very center, but in the center of the 6 realms, you see a circle, and it has a chicken, a pig, and a snake in it. Those are the 3 poisons. The chicken is actually a rooster, represents passion. The snake is hatred, and the pig is indifference or sloth, because pigs just eat whatever comes in front of them without discriminating at all. And so these things are sort of the core, at almost the core, of ego and suffering and confusion. Then he says, he's talking about, he just says a few words about the five skandhas, regarding them as belonging to oneself. That's thinking that all these things that we think are me. You know, they it's like putting that word cart on the collection of all these different actions and thinking that it actually has a real being, when in fact it's just a name that we put on something. Just like I put the name microphone on this, but the reality is something that you experience, and the name is just a name. We get very much hung up in the name of I. Protecting oneself from impermanence, that we want to develop an eternal life. And he said, first, in order to do this, you seek the wrong kind of a teacher. It's the old Shangri-La approach. You want your spirit to last forever, so go seek a master and ask to be saved, he says. I've been there. I listened to Ram Dass back in the 60s, and I was about to go to India and look for a guru the way he found one, and maybe learn how to worship God the way he did. Then I met Rinpoche, and all that got short-circuited. He talks about, here's a problem, believing that one's view is best. And he calls this being based on spiritual materialism. You really want to have, you're telling yourself or having somebody else tell you that you are in the right. You're safe, you're in a good place. Yeah? And he's saying, you've got to give all that up. It's just a matter of being here, being aware, being intelligent, being open and compassionate, and participating in the world. He says it's based on the belief that some magical power is going to save you. Then there's nihilism and eternalism. He says with either of those two approaches, nihilism or eternalism, you don't need to meditate because it comes to you, though actually it is the belief in the philosophy that comes to you. And here he says, we're going to come to the end of this soon. He says, in order to solve these issues, all of these, you need a genuine lineage holder, a Buddhist lineage holder, a person who really knows it, has it, can cut through all this stuff and show you direct experience of your mind in the present moment. A direct, genuine lineage holder of an authentic tradition. And they will show you simplicity, direct experience, rather than the complex philosophies of Hinduism and other theisms, which are ways of trying to nourish one's existence and one's ego. If that's there, I'm here. If God's out there, I'm here worshiping him. If I'm worshiping him, he's got to be out there and I'm here. And relating to these, and the point is, it's all imaginary. He used to he was relentless in needling us about being true believers about Buddhism, because you can pervert that too. He says you have to develop an entirely different system of thinking in which there is no security and no ego. Only awareness brings a real sense of that non-dual approach. Awareness, coming back. You're thinking, and then you realize you're thinking, and at the moment you realize you're thinking, you're already back. Don't have to do anything more about it. Don't beat yourself up. That's another kind of theism. If you beat yourself up and say, oh, I'm a bad meditator, that's another form of self-improvement, as though there's somebody out there watching and judging this Buddha, this God figure. So you don't do that. You just realize you're thinking, and it's also, when you give up that self-judgment, it's just tremendously compassionate for yourself. You stop beating yourself up about having to be better. And a third thing that happens is that you lose ground. You begin to lose your reference point. When you stop criticizing your own mind and yourself, it's like you come completely present and there's no forward or backward, no up or down. It's like you're floating free in space. Then he talks about the passion, aggression, and ignorance. He says a couple of interesting things in addition to what I've just said. He says that in aggression, there's a tinge of passion. There's a faint sense of desire and lust, which makes the aggression more powerful. So having an aggressive attitude to somebody is equal to having a love affair with somebody. I remember I've thought about this all my life, that when I'm really engaged in a hatred of someone, they hurt me and I'm engaged in combat, there's some faint source of pleasure in it, that keeps us sort of locked in a relationship, together, keeps me joined to that person. And when I'm really in love with somebody, there's some faint sense of aggression and hatred as well. And I think of, you want to test the other person. You want to try them. And then I think of things like, BDSM, the mixture of passion and aggression. And I think that there's a little bit of that even in the purest kind of love. And that's what he's talking about. He says, in passion we experience in samsara is mixed with hatred, wantingness. You want to hold on to that person. You want to control them. You don't want them to leave. Grasping and possessiveness. We want to possess in order to buttress the sense of our own existence. So we become possessive about our lovers. And in aggression there is a faint sense of desire and lust, which makes the aggression more powerful. I've always felt that about that aggression, that you're so locked with that other person in a dance. As far as ignorance is concerned, it has elements of both passion and aggression. You think you might not be intelligent enough to know, therefore you begin to ignore what you might know and develop hatred toward knowledge and learning. I don't know, that's one that confuses me. I'm not quite sure. We could talk about it. He says that we realize that once we have fallen into any of these patterns, or all of them, we experience constant struggle, competition, pain, and confusion. These patterns don't particularly go away for practitioners, you and us and I. In order to deal with suffering, we need to understand the mechanics of how it develops and functions. He says, first you have to slow down before you begin to look at the cure, and take the time to understand and realize the second noble truth, the origin of suffering. There is no other cure for suffering at this point except to understand its makeup and psychology. So we become much more sophisticated and aware of how our suffering works. We can see it sort of working away. And we can have a discussion. Did anybody in the room do this reading? I think Joe did, right? And your name, Mark? No, it's not Mark. What is it? Rich. I'm Rich. Sorry. I'm terrible. Rich, you did it. Yeah. Huh? You did it too?
Yeah.
Right. What do you think of the reading?
Well, like you said, it was really digest. There wasn't a lot there. It was kind of short.
Yeah,
So
that's what I felt too.
So your talk was very interesting because you really elaborated and brought out points that were kind of missing.
Yeah.
We have the mic.
Yeah, let's go pass the mic. Come on, you talk about your job.
I'll just say that
Sure, say it again.
for the record.
Is it green? Okay, hold it up close.
I said that
Oh,
I
that's
thought the
good.
reading was rather brief. It was a digest, like you explained. But your talk tonight really brought out the points and really elaborated on the readings and really made a lot more sense. Thank you.
Yeah, it was kind of headlines. Yeah.
But I'm still really curious how we learn more about the makeup and the psychology behind it, right? That's not really explained.
You know, take a look at Cutting Through Spiritual Materialism. That's a book. In it, there's a chapter called The Development of Ego. It talks about the 5 skandhas, just what I just went through. And then there's another chapter on the 6 realms. And actually the realms, then another person, David Nichtern, has written a book on the realms. And they're a lot of fun to think, to sort of identify what's your particular overarching realm. Yeah. Kind of hard to identify, but you can do it. It's just because it's so close. What your realm is. Rochelle.
Well, one of the ways that Trungpa Rinpoche used to talk about the realms was that we experience all the realms constantly through our everyday life. And it isn't just something out there. But I was thinking about the God realm down here on our planet. And a perfect example of that is when you're super rich, you know all the right people, and then suddenly something goes wrong in your life. Like, let's say you lose your money, or you lose your position, or you get into trouble with the law, and then suddenly nobody knows you anymore. Like you were saying, that when the gods start to fall, they start to smell, and then the other gods won't relate to them. Suddenly nobody knows you anymore. Nobody's inviting you to anything. Like people shun you in your circle. And so it's extremely painful and lonely. But it happens all the time. So, yeah.
Yeah, they say that when a god falls, the disappointment is so great because they've had so much that they can be plunged into the hell realm. Don't have to, but it's likely.
Yeah, because in the human realm, it's recommended that you don't get too high or too low. You just try to stay very even. So if something good happens, you don't get completely ecstatic and you're so excited. And then when something bad happens, or that good thing, diminishes, you don't fall so low into a deep depression. You kind of like maintain an equilibrium. And that kind of mind only comes from practicing, where you see the highs and lows and you just maintain, you try to just relax with whatever happens. But it's nice to experience luxury in life. Like you go to a beautiful spa or vacation or something. But then you don't get attached to it. And it's not that you can't enjoy luxury or the God realm, but when you're attached to it and you can't relate to anything else, that's when it starts to become extremely painful, because when that dissolves somehow, then you have no place to go from there.
Great.
Okay.
I had a question about the envious gods.
Which? Jealous gods?
Yes, exactly. You mentioned in that realm there are 3 ways that those gods become one. One of them was they were born that way, or something like that.
Oh no, you could be born into the body of a jealous god.
Yeah.
And we can't see those because they're in a different sphere.
Yeah.
The second is that you could be a human being, but have the mentality of a jealous god. And that will probably last for years and years and years. It's your pattern, your style. And then the third is that you can experience, that you can experience the jealous god realm in a moment. So suddenly you have a flash of envy or a flash of jealousy, And it just lasts for minutes or hours, and then it's gone. That's, you're experiencing the jealous God realm in that very brief modality. Yeah. Yeah. Cliff?
I look at the realms as psychological states. And what I find is interesting that the realm, the only realm that they say that you can become enlightened from is the human realm. So the human realm being the most valuable of all the realms because of that. I happen to find the teaching very exciting tonight, and I think that it touches on the core of Buddhism and the core to liberation from dukkha, in that the imaginary self that we create, which is nothing but just a thought, and we spend so much energy and stress to protect it and to cherish it and to enliven it, and it's just simply a thought, simply an illusion that just drifts away when you drop into presence. And one of the things that I didn't do the reading recently, but I have read the material in the past, that there's two aspects that I got from it on how we relate to this skandhas. One is that the self is what experiences it. So I'm seeing, and I'm hearing, and I'm feeling, and I'm wanting. So that's the emotion, or the emotions that we experience. Well, the other one is the possessor of it, where it's my body, and who is outside of the body that possesses it, or inside of it. There's no one there to be found. And we think that we possess these things. And again, it's just this imaginary thing that we just concoct. So, good teachings.
And in fact, there's nobody concocting it either. That's the weird part. It's just sort of this thing that happens, a story that builds and takes on a life of its own somehow.
So we talked a lot about this imaginary self, the ego, which is not really us, and so what is left, we didn't really talk about it, like what is left behind this imaginary self or the ego, which
What's real?
Yeah, which is real, or what is real. So as far as I understand, it's emptiness, according to Buddhist teachings so far. So could you talk a little bit more about what is left, or what is behind the imaginary self?
Well, it's described in a lot of different ways. Well, not a lot, but quite a few. I think one way that's helpful, and we really can't go into this a lot tonight, we're sort of going to, but we will get to it if we stay with this long enough in the third volume of the Profound Treasury. In a reality is described, because that's what you're asking for. And there are fundamentally two main descriptors, three, for reality. Emptiness, luminosity, and compassion. And these are the three fundamental characteristics of the real. Emptiness refers to a way of seeing and being alive, present in the world that is not involved with I and other, in which I and other are seen to be myths, creations. And instead, I and other, the idea of, they say that in error, when one believes in I and other in the style of error, these are the two egos, they call it, the two existence. They call them, in Sanskrit, it's svabhava, which means own being. and there's the own being of the I, and there's the own being of the other. And what Buddhism says is own being doesn't exist. But it has three characteristics that we give to it, which are not true. The three characteristics are that it endures through time, past, present, future. So we say, Lane was here yesterday and he'll be here tomorrow. But that's just a thought. That's just a story. That's a statement that I make. All that I can ever really know in reality is the immediate experience of Lane and everything else. And he's changing his position and his expression and everything every second, every instant. And my awareness of it, I'm not looking at it now and then it comes back, so that my lived experience is changing instant by instant. And nothing inheres, nothing endures. There is no substance to it. It's just like we're in the middle of a 3D movie. All of this is like images passing on a screen, except it's three-dimensional screen. The second quality is that of svabhava, of things existing, is that they are independent. That cushion has its own independent existence, and so does that person sitting there. And these words, they exist independently, but they don't. They exist as part of a matrix. And in fact, you can't even find them, because the instant you try and grasp it, you're looking at something that's already different. Your perception of it changes as your head moves, as your attention shifts. Moment by moment, the presentation is constantly shifting, changing. And yet we think that it has an independence to it. That's the svabhava. And the third quality is that it's one thing, that it's unitary, and nothing is one thing. Everything is part of this matrix that we experience in the moment. And we're in the middle of like this forest of interdependence, interpenetration. Everything's working together like this. So the first quality is emptiness. The second quality is that in spite of the fact that nothing has any own being, yet things arise. I've forgotten your name.
Marcus.
Marcus. There's Marcus. Here's this voice. There's the feeling of the foot on the floor. There's the boards. All this stuff arises, and yet it has no existence. There's a slogan that in Tantrism that you might do. You might chant at some point if you're at a particular kind of teaching. And at the beginning of the teaching, before the teaching actually starts, you go through a number of liturgies. And one is just this kind of little slogan, a slant that you chant. You say, nothing exists, nothing has own being, svabhava. Nothing has any true existence. And yet things arise. Things arise, and yet they don't exist. That's what you say. So this is the magic, you see, that within emptiness, there is this appearance arising and passing away continually. So there's the display. That's the fact. So there's emptiness, and then there is luminosity. It's like there's space, and within the space, all these colors and sensations arise and pass away instantaneously. You can't even grasp them. They're like water going through your fingers. And the third aspect is compassion. And what compassion really means is that in this space of arising and passing away, there is immense communication, immense involvement, interpenetration. And that communication has a heat to it. It's like love, it's like appreciation. But it's communication, it's the communication of what things mean. Everything is communicating its meaning all the time. That leaf falling, that person speaking, they're all, everything that you experience, all the phenomenal world, that as it appears coming into being and going out of being instantaneously, is communicating something. That's what compassion means. It's called Ningje, noble heart in Tibetan. So these are the three aspects of the real. What was the question that sponsored all this?
What was left after? What was left after the ego?
This is what's left. And then there are descriptions of how this arises, and we're not going to get into this, but you can read, it's in Cutting Through too, he covered everything in that book. At the end there's a section on the Buddha families. You see the idea of the mandala. The mandala is a schematic for reality. It's a way of describing the world. And there are mandalas within mandalas within mandalas. Each one of us has our own mandala. We're all looking east. We're part of a mandala right now, this class. We're sitting in a mandala, which is New York City, you know. And there's endless mandalas within and interpenetrating each other. And each mandala has its own structure. And these are described as being the 5 Buddha families. And it's what they're referring to, actually, who knows, maybe there are millions of Buddha families, but in the teachings they described 5. I was reading Samsar Khyentse Rinpoche. He was saying, this is just kind of guesswork, that there are only 5. He said, but it's a useful way to take things, you know, provisionally. And then what they do is they describe how each one of us presents. You know, each one of us and the cushions and everything, all phenomena presents with certain qualities, colors, shapes, heats, styles of communication, weather, you know, intelligence of different kinds. All these things, and this is real. This is beyond thought. This is the way phenomena present. You can characterize it in terms of the 5 Buddha families. And Dzogchen Khyentse basically suggested there might be a lot more than just 5. But that's the way we study it. It's very simple. So each one of us is presenting who we really are. Whether we would like it or not, we might be veiling it in concept about ourselves, in self-doubt of one kind or another. But nonetheless, it still comes through. You're a woman, I'm a guy, you know, you have a particular style and appearance, and I have mine, and everybody in this room has their own. And the room itself. So you can study the Buddha families, and this is how everything, the phenomenal world, presents as it comes into being and passes out of being. It's constantly communicating what it is. It's really beautiful. What I just described, by the way, those 3 things, space, phenomena, luminosity, and compassion, those are the 3 bodies of the Buddha, they call them. The 3 kayas. The Dharma kaya is space, the Sambhoga kaya, which is sometimes translated as the enjoyment body of the Buddha, that's the luminosity of phenomena. And then the Nirmana kaya is the communication. And Nirmanakaya, that's Sanskrit. The Tibetan for Nirmanakaya you might recognize is Tulku. Anybody know the word Tulku? Yeah. It's a Buddha incarnate, and they're communicating to us the Dharma. They're great teachers who are Tulkus. Pondok Rinpoche is a Tulku. In fact, everybody on this shrine is a Tulku. Absolutely every one of them. I guess that's why they're on the shrine. They're an act of compassion, you see. The compassion to us, they're bringing us the teachings. Well, I think we ought to end. So we'll dedicate the merit. And this is the last chant we do. And the idea behind this chant is that you're giving away the benefit you've gotten tonight for all other sentient beings. And I think it was Dzogchen Khyentse, someone said to him, well, look, if I give away all the benefit, how am I ever going to get enlightened? And he said, that's the dirty little secret. It's the way you do get enlightened. Is by giving away all the benefit. And he called it the dirty little secret, which I thought was kind of funny. So, by this merit, may all attain omniscience, may it defeat the enemy of wrongdoing, from the stormy waves of birth, old age, sickness, and death, from the ocean of samsara, may I free all beings, by the confidence of the golden sun of the great East, May those started in the radiance wisdom bloom. May the dark ignorance of sentient beings be dispelled. May all beings enjoy profound, brilliant glory. Thanks, everybody.